So I think we're on now, right? I'm gonna assume we are and start talking. Yes. Okay. Welcome everybody. I'm Bill Petrocelli, one of the owners of Book Passage in Corte Madera, California. And it is my great pleasure today to host a really lively event. I mean, just in the few minutes we've been here talking beforehand, I can see what a great trio this is. And it's going to be a great book. Steve Kettmann is the editor and publisher and the main moving force behind the book Now What, which we will be talking about a lot. But he's got with him Mary Curtis, wonderful reporter from the East Coast who writes for Roll Call, has her own podcasts, and she was talking all the various things she's written over the years, and I'm hoping she'll talk a little more about it. Then Anthony Scaramucci. I'm tempted to say he needs no introduction, but I think I can count on him to introduce himself. There are people that talk about timely books, but this is timelier than timely. I don't even know how you get more timely than timely. But I mean, November 3rd, we thought the election was over. Maybe. December 11th, we thought the election was over. Maybe. That was when the Electoral College met. January 6th, we thought the election was going to be over. That's when Congress met and was almost, the members were almost murdered. And now, February 2nd, 3 months later, I'm sitting here reading the 80-page report from the House Impeachment Committee talking about what happened in the election of the post-election period. I mean, it's a never-ending process. You've heard of gifts that keep on giving. Well, this is a disaster that keeps on taking. It just seems like it'll never stop. And quite frankly, I don't know how Steve Kettmann did it to put together this book this quickly with this many great writers, 38 essays in all, of all shapes and sizes, talking about this entire experience. I mean, we have everything from, Al Sharpton to Anthony Scaramucci. That covers the whole political spectrum there. Joan Walsh and Mary Curtis, who's with us today, journalists, baseball executives. We got representatives of the Giants and the A's, both teams in the area. Both of them are in this collection. I mean, the essays range from the heartfelt to the hilarious. And I would just say that if you do nothing else but read Keith Olbermann's essay, you'll fall off the chair laughing because it's just sort of this dark humor funny. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and turn the whole proceeding over to Steve Kettmann, who's a veteran journalist, the editor and publisher of this, and also the publisher of something called Wellstone Books, who publishes a series of books that we've had before, and we're going to have more of them in the future. Anyway, take it away, people. By the way, I should say the questions, you can ask questions by the Twitch chat feature. Put the questions down there and hopefully they can get to them by the time the proceeding is over. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks so much for hosting this event, and thank you to Mary and Anthony for being here. We'll have some time at the end for questions, so please do send those in. And I'll read a little bit from my introduction to the collection, and then have Mary read a little bit from hers, and then I think we'll just go to questions with Anthony, because got a few of those too, and then also some questions for Mary. But this is a very unusual book in that the whole thing took 2 months from coming together as an idea to me reaching out to different contributors to having a complete book. And for that, I have to thank the 38 contributors, including Anthony and Mary. We were talking beforehand, first 9 people literally that I called up to ask if they would take a flyer and try to write a meaningful personal essay, 2,000 words and up, about their experience of digesting the November elections, the thoughts they had, the conversations that they had with people, what it made them feel. The first 9 all were in. I think the 10th person was a maybe. So there was an incredible interest in having a chance to try to dig a little deeper. So much of what we do in the area of political analysis is very short term, very forgettable. And after a month of going back and forth, it all added up to nothing. I think the essays in this collection, when they work, which I think is a lot, are able to go deeper. And that very much includes both Mary's essay and Anthony's, where he takes us into the Oval Office with Donald Trump, shows a human side of Donald Trump, which he can tell us about, but then also talks about fighting so hard to have Trump defeated at the ballot, because that's the way our system works. So let me read a little bit from my introduction and then move on to Mary. So this is how I start the book. It was one of many times that week when I thought the networks might call the 2020 election for Biden-Harris any minute, and I didn't want to miss a thing. I carried the girls' little blonde wood table and chairs into my workroom. And by the way, they're still back there behind me. Computer in the background, tuned to election coverage as we sat down to dinner. We don't have a TV. For most of their lives, Coco and Anais had never seen us watching cable news on a computer. October 20 had been the first exception. Coco, 6, came in at one point during the first Biden-Trump debate and sat on the sofa next to my computer. She gave the screen a few minutes of blank-faced scrutiny, more confused the longer she watched. Then her face collapsed into a scowl. "I don't like this," she wailed. "Why are they so mad?" I lay in bed with her that night for an hour before she had finally calmed down and could sleep. Now, 2 days after the election, the girls and I were discussing food preference. Or were we? "I hate parsnip," Coco, never halfway on anything, insisted. Our conversation took a few twists and turns from there. Soon she was asking, "What is hate, Daddy?" It was a rhetorical question, or a philosophical one. Coco knew what the word meant. She wanted to hear me expand on the idea, which I did, giving her a somewhat sanitized answer about hate meaning really not liking something a lot. A light went on in her eyes. "Do you hate Trump?" she asked me suddenly. I stared back at her. Did I hate Donald Trump? I had to give my daughter an honest answer. "No, Coco," I said, "I don't hate Trump. At times, yes, I wondered. I really hated so much of what he said and did since he came down that escalator at Trump Tower. I once stood near Donald Trump on a short elevator ride at old Yankee Stadium in the late 1990s and saw him then, as I see him now, as a shell of bluster and bluff with sharp enough edges to try to prevent you from looking within to the hollow, pain-filled center. I don't hate the man, but I hate that his con, running for president as a publicity stunt, led to 4 of the worst years in the history of our country. I hate what his utter cynicism and naked racism did to bring out the worst in so many. I hate how his manipulation, shamelessness, and craven bad faith challenged us to be better and do better. And so often, those terrible 4 years, we collectively came up short. As John Lewis once told me, removing Trump from office will be a down payment on our future, not more. Will Raymond, a 23-year-old who regrets not having voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, writes in his essay from Estonia, where he was a professional basketball player, quote, "The Biden-Harris victory is a step in the right direction, but in no way is it the end-all, be-all." I think each of us has to look within and challenge ourselves to do better, be better, if we are truly going to move forward in 5 ways to connect with other Americans who might disagree on much, but can agree on our common humanity. I hope the perspectives that follow can help kickstart that reckoning, a reckoning not only with the depths of depravity and corruption the Trump years unleashed and exposed, but also a reckoning with ourselves. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Mary. She is also going to read a section from her wonderful essay, and then maybe we'll keep it going after that. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you, Steve. And Bill, it's Mary C. It's Mary Cecilia, my Catholic grandmama. Okay, my piece is called The Progress and the Struggle. Watching Joe Biden and Kamala Harris thank poll workers on the day the networks finally called the election, I smiled and thought of my late mother, Evelyn Curtis. She was a bona fide GOP elections official, tasked with making sure a representative from each party spent the big day surveying the scene, checking that all was legal and proper. Election day was always special in our house. From my mother, I learned the almost sacred ritual of going to the polls, of studying every candidate and bond issue, of thinking about the duty all Americans must fulfill. In our home, we knew the stories of heroes such as Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis, who bled to make it possible and sometimes did not survive their efforts to protect something fundamental, the vote. How could any Black person dishonor that? Yes, if you missed it, my parents were old-fashioned Republicans, as in the party of Lincoln, at a time when a sturdy, moderate contingent formed an important part of the GOP base. Think Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts, or Governor Nelson Rockefeller of New York, exemplars of that now rare middle-of-the-road brand, many of whom represented states now colored blue on most electoral maps. My mom felt comfortable there with her conservative economic views, Catholic values, and socially liberal leanings. She believed in a healthy two-party system and in maintaining faith in the integrity of the vote. So when protesters crowded public servants counting ballots in 2020 in Detroit and Philadelphia and Maricopa County in Arizona, accusing them of fraudulent sleight of hand, I realized the toll of long hours and meticulous work and the injustice of accusations from citizens they were trying to serve by doing democracy. Can civics return as a staple in American elementary school curriculum? Can schools make history come alive for students, distracted even before the days of virtual learning? Please? The reason for Mom's political change of heart, her party's Southern strategy, and it broke her heart. The racial division stoked by Republicans, taking advantage of whites alienated by Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson's signing of civil rights legislation, led the party on a path that raised up Donald Trump, his sycophants and supporters, who opportunistically and diabolically used fear of Black Lives Matter protesters and the specter of hordes of the other invading suburbs, apparently led by a marauding Cory Booker, as a last-ditch campaign message. I could tell in our conversations back then that Mom felt saddened and betrayed and left with no political home. If she were alive, she would have been disappointed that fear has such staying power.
Wow, thank you, Mary. Anthony, I don't think we prepped you to be ready for this, but would you be able to, I can talk for a minute to give you a minute if you want, but to read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs? I know you have the book there from your essay.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Let me just get to the right page. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. It's page 141.
Okay, that makes it easy for me.
Yeah, I just had to find it myself.
What's interesting is, as you know, Ketterman, I'm not very promotional, so let me hold up your book, right? I just want everybody to see the book. So, all right, I'll read a couple paragraphs, but I think the more telling thing, which I would love to discuss with everybody, is the aftermath of Donald Trump and what's going to happen this coming week with the impeachment trial. But then how do you deal with Trumplicans, which are Republicans for Trump, and the 74 million people? And I have an open question, maybe you guys can help me answer. How do you deal with people like me? Because I got still half the country. I got half the country mad at me because I was with Trump. I've got the other half of the country mad at me because I left Trump. Okay, and as my 28-year-old son says to me, "Hey, Dad, you're just killing my networking opportunities." Okay, because you're in no man's land. And the question is that where we want to be, where we have so much sanctimony and so much righteousness towards each other that we're just going to either, I guess, cancel each other out, or do we want those 74 million people to just break off from the country and float into the Atlantic Ocean? I'm just trying to figure out what we're doing to each other and what we're going to do for each other. But I'll read a few paragraphs.
Yeah, 2 or 3 paragraphs is fine.
Yeah,
we'll move on to the discussion.
Thank God Trump lost the election. If he didn't lose, I'm telling you, there would have been an unbelievable nightmare. And by the way, that's a nightmare that people like John Kelly and I totally understand. You're one election away from Hungarian-style authoritarianism in the country if we're not careful. Joe Biden repudiated Trump. He got the highest vote count in history. He brought with him a progressive African-American woman to be his vice president. So he made history by crossing the finish line with her. I think he kicked Trump's ass. That's how it looks to me on the Thursday afternoon after Election Day. I went after Trump at the peak of his popularity when no other Republican would. When he talked in August of 2019 about how members of Congress should go back to their countries that they came from. These are the members of the swamp of the squad, of course. I turned on him. I said, that's racist. He's racist. I said, he's an American nativist. People told me I was a kamikaze pilot in August of 2019. They said he was going to win re-election, and I was crazy to stand up against him. I'm not crazy. I said, he's crazy. He's not going to win re-election because he can't handle the presidency. I was at the height of his popularity, by the way. As I worked as hard as I could against Trump in the election, I told everybody that I could that this is a really weird, unwell guy that was going to hurt a lot of people, just completely unfit and mentally unstable, a danger to the democratic institutions and norms of our society. I'll read one more paragraph. I tried to learn from my mistakes, and working for Trump as White House communications director for 11 days in July of 2017 was one hell of a learning experience. I thought Trump was going to help people like my family and friends on Long Island, working people just trying to make a living, but I misjudged his character. This was an ego flaw of mine. Ultimately, I have to take responsibility for that. You learn to try to get your ego out of things. But, you know, listen, we're all products of our environment. I grew up in a blue collar neighborhood, and I will be lying to you guys if I didn't tell you I wasn't moved by the messaging during the campaign, 71 campaign stops. I watched a very large swath of disaffected Americans that frankly could have been my dad. My dad was a hard worker, but he had a very good middle-class hourly wage. In that very same job, fast forwarding 40 years, going from say 1976 to 2016, those wages are down 26.5%. Those people go from aspirational working class people to desperational ones. And so we can sit here and call them deplorable. We can ridicule them. We can say every one of them is racist, but then, man, you are really missing what's going on in the country. And so I got Trump wrong, but I'm telling you, we have to fix this problem for those 74 million people.
Well, let's look forward.
I do want to jump in, Steve,
Sure.
can I jump in for a second
Sure.
and just say that oftentimes when people say blue collar working class, they need to say what they mean because, you know, my father was working class. I grew up in a working class neighborhood, and the majority of the working class people in this country are Black and brown. It was primarily the white working class that went for Donald Trump because Black folks, they hurt too. The Black and brown folks were hurting economically, but they saw what Donald Trump was. As my husband, who's a New Yorker, said, everybody in New York knew who he was. This is a man who, he and his dad, you know, were sued twice by the Nixon Justice Department for discriminating against Black people in their houses. He's the one that took out the full page ad for the execution of the Central Park Five. This is this guy, and they weren't fooled. I'm not saying that all the people who voted for him were racist. That's not a thing to say. I don't judge people, but it is to say that for a lot of folks who saw some things to like in his message, they ignored a lot that folks who look like me couldn't afford to ignore because it was a matter of life and death. And I think that came to roost on January 6th, when you saw a lot of those people with pro-Trump flags. There was a gallows on the Capitol. They brought Confederate flags into the Capitol, which didn't even happen in the Civil War. They were calling police officers who were African-American the N-word. Now, that's not everybody who voted for him, but boy, those are the people that a lot of Republicans even now won't disavow because they know that that's a chunk of their base.
So
Hey,
I want to respond because
Okay,
I
sure.
think Mary's
You
on.
respond, and then I'm going to pick it back up.
Okay, all right. I'm going to respond because I think Mary's onto something, and this is the zeitgeist of our times. And this is among many regrets that I have professionally, many regrets that I have politically. There was a sentence that Mary just uttered where she said people knew who he was. And she then said that people that look like Mary, Black and brown people couldn't afford to go with Donald Trump. I think that was more or less what you said. Hopefully I'm repeating it correctly. And what I want to say to Mary and other people, what I missed, and this is my regret, is the pain that I was accidentally causing by working for, supporting, and enabling him. And so what I did, which was totally wrong in hindsight, and I wish I could understand why I did it at the time, but I think some of it was ego-driven, some of it was self-narrative driven, and some of it was cognitive dissonance where I was ignoring the signals that Mary is presenting. So I'll just say this quickly. Mary, I apologize for working for Donald Trump. I didn't realize the amount of pain that was going to be caused as a result of his presidency. So I have to own that for the rest of my life. But at least, as I've told my kids, if you get something wrong and you know it's wrong, don't stay wrong. And I tried to change course and correct and work diligently to try to defeat him.
Thank you, Anthony. I think that was a very eloquent statement. I want to talk a little bit about Republicans who have spoken out against Trump and about where we go from here. There are not pro-Trump voices in this collection. That may or may not surprise you out there watching, but there are a number of current and former Republicans. And one of them is Denver Rigelman, who up until last month was a GOP congressman. And he was one of the people to speak out against and say that Biden had won the election and to speak out against QAnon. And it was pretty incredible what happened to this man. I'm in close touch with him, and I keep hearing about things, but he has been subjected to so much abuse from so many people. People, even family members, have disowned him, called him in league with the Antichrist, and told them that he has betrayed his country. And Anthony and Mary, this is something that is a real problem. We can't forget about we have to have a period of taking a hard look at what happened the last 4 years at crimes and other things. We have to look at January 6th and what caused that. But there has to be some way for the Republicans who aren't cultists to step forward and speak out. And I think Anthony makes a good point that you can be wrong and that you could admit you were wrong, but you can also move forward. And what is your advice, Mary, for people that are in that position of saying that I was wrong, or I've learned more than I understood then? What do I do now? What do you want those people to do?
Well, you do have to have a certain amount of courage, because you can see many of the Republicans who came out against the actions of the president and of all the people who flooded the Capitol, who spoke against conspiracy theories. And you can see they did try to step out, even while some still, after the insurrection, voted to say that the election was not free and fair. And then some have pulled back because they might have to pay an electoral price. So I think you have to realize that maybe you do lose in the short term, but in the long term, do you support democracy? First, I think a big thing would be for so many Republicans to just say, yes, Joe Biden won, which so many surprisingly won't say even now. And it's interesting because I do have this podcast, Equal Time. And last week I had a guest, Dr. Gail Christopher, who talked about how so many countries go through that Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And she had put forth this Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission that she's gotten some support from Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Senator Cory Booker, and advising them on trying to actually put forth something like that, because it's going to be very difficult to move forward unless we all have a shared truth, which right now we don't have.
Okay, let me jump in there and raise some topical points. In the essay collection, another essay comes from J.L. Covan, the comedian who a lot of you have probably seen on social media. He does a pretty hilarious Trump impression with his red MAGA cap turned backwards. You've seen that, Anthony, right? You know him, right?
I've been interviewed by him.
Yeah,
Him and I
yeah.
had a repartee with each other.
Smart, really smart guy. I think he has a master's or something like that. But he had used that imagery in his essay, which again was written in November, talking about how we have removed the orange tumor, but now we're going to have to go through political chemo, which I often mention as my favorite metaphor in the book, because the point is nobody's saying it's going to be easy or predictable. We're going to go through a lot of twists and turns here. And then just in, I think, the last 24 hours, Mitch McConnell, who is playing his usual, complicated game, finally came out with a strong statement talking about the, quote, loony lies that are like, quote unquote, cancer to the GOP. This is after McConnell had said or let it be known that he felt that what Trump did in encouraging insurrection was an impeachable offense, but then voted to try to throw out impeachment. So he's kind of all over the place. I would like to hear you both comment on McConnell's quotes and what you think he's up to. You want to start, Mary?
Well, why doesn't Anthony start since I just spoke?
Okay, you start, Anthony.
So Senator McConnell privately is trying to instill confidence in the Republican donor base by speaking with a forked tongue. So what is he trying to do? He's going to the donor base and he's saying these people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, we're going to figure out a way to excise them. We're going to figure out the way to make sure that they're not candidates for the Republican Party. And we're going to expiate them the way we got smarter with the Tea Party stuff at the beginning of the Obama administration. That's what he's saying to the establishment Republican voter. What he's saying to the other side of things, as he looks at polling, they are scared out of their minds about these people and they don't want to overly alienate them. And I think what Mary said earlier in her statement about these are their voters, and so a result of which they're putting somebody, Kevin McCarthy, who's lost every semblance of morals. And I'm going to tell you something that Kevin said to me a few short years ago when I was, again, the garden variety Republican fundraiser. God only knows how I ended up as the White House communications director. It's a whole other story, but all I basically was a garden variety, Rockefeller-ish Republican, raising money for these guys because it was great for my business, and I'm always interested in politics. But they're making a terrible mistake. This is my opinion. I'm going to use Kevin's own words. Kevin said to me that we don't have thermostats in Washington. We only have thermometers. What is a thermometer metaphorically? Temperature's hot. I'm going to say super hot things. Let me hold up the thermometer, test the temperature, and then I'll reflect that back to the population. A thermostat is something you have on your wall. You're trying to guide the temperature to a certain coordinate, and you punch in the coordinates, and now you're trying to guide people to where you think they need to be. That's real leadership. And so what you're getting from Kevin McCarthy right now, and to an extent from Mitch McConnell, although less so, is this hopeless equivocation about where they are, rather than stating in a principled way, hey, this is completely wrong. And people like this, we have no tolerance for them. I don't care how many people voted for them. I don't care how much money she just gave to the Republican Congressional Caucus. I think she raised $1.8 million off her insanity and gave 10% of it to them. We're excising her. Okay, that's that chemo that J.L. Calvin is referring to. And so until they do that, their destination is one of great peril and tragedy, because that party is going to split into two pieces. And let's say their side of the party, the QAnon, MAGA, Frankensteinish version of the party, is 30% of the American population. There's a good 10, 12, 15% of the American population that is just sort of center right, and more or less the way Mary described her mom, okay, in terms of the way they think about their politics. And so therefore, those people, okay, have to break away from the other people, and you have to put the Republican Party on the dustbin of history. And so that's where it's heading. So to me, I don't know why they're doing this. It's all about expediency. If you ask Mayor Giuliani, well, sir, what about your legacy? He says, well, I don't care. I'm going to be dead. So let me put some more spray tan on and some more hair dye, have it drip from my cheek. I don't care. So, I mean, guys, we're in a weird, funky town situation. And so without real leadership in the Republican Party, I predict that the party is in for a generational disaster.
Well, I think Mitch McConnell cares about power. He loved being the Senate Majority Leader, and he was incredibly upset when they lost those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. And he blames Donald Trump a lot for that, for him going in and throwing up doubts about the electoral process, and also his attacks on the Georgia officials, Republican officials. So, you saw in the beginning where he thought that Donald Trump could help them win those seats. So he said, well, let him go through the process. Even he, remember, did not immediately recognize Joe Biden as the winner. And now he's looking at it, and it is political. He's won his seat, but he wants that majority back. And I do think, as Anthony said, he is looking at the political calculations, even though it wasn't just blue collar people that voted for Trump. We saw people with private planes going into January 6th. But he's looking at the numbers, and you see in the states, quite a few Republicans are changing their party affiliation. Not all to Democrats, though. To, as Anthony says, that independent. They're looking to see what's going to happen to the Republican Party, and he's playing the long game. He can afford to. While Republicans in the House are in these gerrymandered districts, so they can be extreme as they want to be, he's looking and seeing what is going to happen to the party in the future. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, while she is on the TV all the time, and he can see that this long term is not going to be good for the party, particularly when you have this volatile and unpredictable group of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, and we don't know what's going to happen next. The FBI is saying, that white domestic terrorism is the major problem, and they have weapons. So I think, McConnell's also afraid of the narrative getting away from him and from Republicans, whereas the face of the Republican Party becomes Marjorie Taylor Greene. And the whole thing about low taxes, small government, all of those things. Like I have a column this week saying all those slogans they had about law and order, and that I'm sorry, that's not valid anymore. That's not what the Republican Party is about anymore. And Mitch McConnell wants to change that narrative.
Let me ask each of you about impeachment coming up. What each of you expects to happen and what each of you thinks should happen. Starting with Anthony.
So obviously he should be convicted and he should be barred from ever running again. And while they have him weakened, they should take him lights out. If they were principled people, he called for the insurrection. He planned it. You could read Jonathan Swan's article today in Axios. It's a very detailed planning and organization on his part. He enjoyed the insurrection, said he was going to go up to the Capitol and walk with them. Of course, he didn't because he's a coward, but he did incite it and he did want it. And he was hoping for a Miramar-like situation where the military moved in with his help and so forth, and they renounced the elections as they did in Miramar as fraudulent. So for all of those reasons, he should be impeached. If you don't like those reasons, let's talk about the abuse of power. And there's 100 different things that he's done since his last impeachment, including some of these vague pardons that deserve impeachment. And so he should be convicted. Now, unfortunately, born from political expediency in our society right now, we do not have 17 Republican senators that are going to move to impeach him. You have one chance here, and that is a recusal where senators decide not to show up for the vote and they abstain from the vote. And then you can do the math and you can possibly get to 55, 60 votes, which makes up 2/3 of the voting, and he gets convicted. And if I were inside the brain of Mitch McConnell, I'm not saying I know him that well, but I used to know him pretty well. He would love to have Trump convicted. He would love to have Trump convicted. He has sent out signals. He has sent out signals to journalists, and he has sent out signals to members of his party that he would like to provide them air cover for that conviction, because they got to get the stain of Trump off their backs. If it doesn't happen in the state of New York, or it doesn't happen in the SDNY situation, or it doesn't happen in Georgia when he was trying to strong arm the Secretary of State of Georgia for votes. If there isn't a criminal action that takes him out, he will be a formidable player in the 2024 primary. And this is a money-making exercise for Mr. Trump. He made over $330 million since Election Day, and he will run to raise money off the running.
Yeah, I think that Mitch McConnell would love for it to be an anonymous vote on impeachment. I think that the trial might be different, but it is not, alas, an anonymous vote. So I don't think the 17 votes are there. Obviously, there has to be some kind of accountability. The founders said impeachment while he was impeached when he was in office. And if you said a president can't be impeached until after he leaves office, well, then that would mean any president could do law-breaking things on their way out the door. So most, scholars have said that he can be found guilty, although I don't think he will be. But I do think it's going to be an interesting trial because, Lindsey Graham has said, I don't want witnesses. But the Democrats have signaled that you have witnesses. Obviously, there's video, there's wounded officers, there's the survivors of people who have been killed. There are people who were arrested who said, I went there because my president told me to be there. So it's going to actually force all the senators to be on the record of what do you think of this behavior? That process argument of is it constitutional kind of falls by the wayside when you have actual people hurt and killed. And I think the whole sense of should there be accountability, remember after the Civil War, when everybody wanted it to go by the wayside and so many former Confederates were pardoned, were let go, went back home, no accountability. And what did you get? You got the Klan, you got Jim Crow, you got the government making deals saying, okay, let us go on and we'll leave you alone to do whatever you want to do. So we've seen what happens when there is no accountability. And it's not pretty. So I think they have some pretty strong arguments, although I don't think they will end up, voting guilty. But I do think that there will be price to pay because every one of them, when they come up for re-election, their opponents will remind the people of what they said did not deserve punishment. And let's face it, ordinary Americans, when they do something that is wrong and egregious, they don't get to walk away. And I don't care what color you are or what party you are, you have to be accountable for what you do.
Anthony, I'm just curious, obviously without mentioning names, but you worked with a lot of people in the White House. I assume you're still in contact with at least some of them. What kinds of things do you hear from people that you worked with in the White House?
Well, it's hard for me because some of these people I was very close to, and a lot of them have iced me out now. So I don't want to make up things. That I honestly don't talk to that many people anymore because when you leave a cult-like situation and other people are wrapped into a cult-like situation, they don't like talking to ex or defuncted cult members. So, but there are one or two people that I talk to, and I will tell you on the 6th of January, which was my birthday, which sort of sucks in one way because it's like one of these infamous days now in American history, sort of good in another way because maybe it will be a lodestar or precursor for a better outcome for America. In talking to Secretary Mattis on January 6th, he felt very strongly that we'll emerge stronger from this. So I talked to Jim, I talked to General McMaster, I talked to General Kelly, which is great irony because he fired me, General Kelly. We were sore at each other in the beginning, but it turns out we have a tremendous amount in common, and we've done 7 joint speaking engagements together and traveled all over the world, including Abu Dhabi together to do these speeches, and most recently 3 weeks ago in Abu Dhabi. But one person in particular that I'm actually very close to, you'll be able to figure it out, is a person who used to work for me, called me on the 6th of January and asked me for advice. Someone who's inside the White House. And apparently Pat Cipollone, who is the White House General Counsel, sat everybody down and said, hey, listen, you may want to take a few steps back, stand back 200 feet, Donald Trump could be accused of and ultimately was impeached, he may or may not be convicted of being an insurrectionist. And ultimately, my opinion of Donald Trump is he's a domestic terrorist. He was organizing domestic terror in his own country as the president of the United States. You have to think about how outlandish that is. But somebody did call me and ask me for advice. What should I do? And after that meeting, by the way, 3 or 4 people, a couple of women, resigned from the office of the White House, the executive branch, said, no, Moss, I'm done. They resigned. And then obviously a few cabinet members, including Senator McConnell's wife, Elena Chao, resigned. But this one particular young person asked me what to do. I said, you should pack your stuff up and you should resign. And let me tell you something, and I think you guys know this and people know this that are listening. You're a young person and you're under the influence of that level of power. Remember, what did we learn in the 8th grade? We learned to revere the institution of the presidency. You know, it is the successor of Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt that sits in that seat. And so that young person locked up and froze up and didn't resign. But I can tell you that the aftermath of this for so many people will be a legacy and almost like a tattoo, a scarlet letter for the rest of their lives.
You mentioned advice, and this was a question that came in that I was asked to read, so I'm just curious for your take on it. You've talked about, you know, that you made mistakes, but just curious if you ever wonder what it would be like if the you of now, January 2021 Anthony, could give advice to July 27 Anthony, as you were, you know, considering taking that job, about what this Anthony might tell that Anthony. Have you ever stopped to think about that, or can you now?
I can think about it right now. I mean, listen, I don't regret taking the job. Not because of what happened and not because of who Mr. Trump is, because of what it did to me. It was a massive transformation. As I write in the book, the ridicule, the scrutiny that I went under after my firing was like going through the sewer pipe in the Shawshank Redemption. My oldest son, who's a bit of a wisecracker, just graduated from Stanford Business School. But back then in July of 2017, he put a 14-minute comedy skit together of every late night comedian in America that was torturing me, including some comedic impersonations of me, one of which was on Saturday Night Live. So, and thank God that has never gotten out. I don't know how it hasn't, but you know, maybe he's holding that over me as blackmail. But what I would say is that experience for me has humbled me. That experience for me has made me more psychologically minded. And what I said to Mary, I really mean. You know, I didn't realize by working for Mr. Trump and what he was doing, and I did denounce the Charlottesville thing, by the way, that was a week after I was there. I really didn't fully understand the heartfelt anchoring of the racism. Now, we did have African Americans that were working alongside of us, okay? And, you know, some people thought he was a racist, some people didn't think he was a racist. He was an obvious racist, okay? But I was using a lot of cognitive dissonance back then as a result of lack of self-awareness and psychological mindedness. So what I would say is even further back, the Anthony of today, I would have said to the Anthony of January when I was offered the OPL position. So you guys probably don't remember that, but the president wanted me to be his chief networking officer. Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon did not want that. And on Wall Street, Ketterman, what do they say to you? They say, hey, Ant, I hate your guts. And so therefore, I don't want you to take that job. That's like front stabbing, okay? But Washington people don't do that. They do the backstabbing routine. Mary can tell you because she knows. And so they were producing opposition research about me and they were telling lies about me. And what the hell are these guys doing? And so I got my pride and ego involved. And I wish I could tell that Anthony, hey man, these guys hate your guts. You're not well suited for Washington because you don't have the personality for it. Stay on your job. You just built a beautiful company known as Skybridge. Stay on your job and grow your company and try to get away from these people because they're not for you. But I didn't have the wits to do that, okay? And here's the thing I would tell people, you can like me for this or dislike me, but this is as raw as I can be. When you grow up like I did in a blue collar neighborhood with a blue collar family, It was white and black, by the way. It was, Irish, blacks, Italians, etc. And you grow up like that. And then you have this American dream story. You go to Tufts and Harvard Law School, you build 2 businesses. The idea that I could work for the American president was intoxicating to me. Okay. And the guy was a sociopath, and I screwed up, and I hit an override switch that I never should have. And I wish I could go back to that, Anthony, and say, don't do it. But I will tell you this, I'm very glad I did it, because it's made me a totally different person today versus where I was even 4 short years ago. And by the way, my wife is trying to kill me. She hates Trump almost as much as Melania hates him. I mean, Melania probably hates him more than anybody, but I'm saying, she's up in the top 5. She was ready to divorce me over the whole, she filed for divorce on me during the whole thing. Of course, we've reconciled, thank God, but it was a rough period of time for me. It's been a very traumatic 4 years.
But, well, Anthony, I have a grown son too. He has a PhD from history from Yale, and he's just as impertinent, but he just wouldn't put me on blast publicly. He knows a little better than that. So a little bit luckier.
I haven't been put on blast yet, but I'm sure that that's coming if I do something.
I'm sure it is. It's funny when you talk about working, but I guess because I grew up, like I said, I grew up in West Baltimore, and working class parents, and but worked really hard. My oldest brother actually was a judge. My father went to 8th grade, and my brother ended up getting a law degree. And then, I happened to even fellow at Harvard. So we have Harvard in common, Anthony. But I've always been more comfortable on the outside. I think I have a good politically savvy brain, and I could really work for a campaign or something. But I like being the observer, because I mistrust everything. And I'm not sure, maybe that has to do with how, I grew up as well, to sort of see the holes on every side. And so being a journalist suits me fine, because I really have a tendency not to get sucked into, and like I said it both sides. One of my columns this past year criticized the Democrats as well, when during the primaries, when they were saying, why isn't Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar getting support from Black voters? And I was like, well, why are people asking why the white voters in the Democratic Party are so supporting people who obviously aren't appealing to the base of the party? So I always look on any side with the holes, poking the holes in there. But I will say that with Trump and covering this, and I have a chapter in a book called Covering Politics in the Age of Trump coming out as well. And I do think that among Black journalists covering him, and I've covered every presidential campaign since 2008, we could be very professional, but you could see what was going on. And we were telling our colleagues, the atmosphere at some of those rallies, when he's telling people, look at this protester, if you hit him, I'll pay your legal fees and things like that. It was frightening sometimes, because you could see the energy of the crowd, and it was something that it was very palpable. And so many people saw him as entertainers, as entertainment, even fellow journalists. And you wanted to say, wow, it's something else there. And now I think people are realizing that. As Anthony said, there are a lot of people who came to that realization late, the whole, how much harm could he do? And then when January 6th happened, it was so clear for so many people. That's why this book, though it was written before that happened, is still so relevant, because Trump isn't the president, but as Anthony was saying, Trumpism is still a major part of our country and our party. You saw Kevin McCarthy kiss the ring in Florida. And this is serious. This is, and as the quote you like to use, Steve, in my essay, the people who say they aren't interested in politics, I like to say, well, politics is interested in you, because it's going to affect your health, your paycheck, your kids, your house, everything.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can get to a question or two here at the end.
It's very well said, Mary.
Thank you.
One of the contributors, the first one I lined up is the actress and activist Rosanna Arquette. And she told a great story about getting into the car with her friends, Catherine Keener and Jane Fonda, driving up the California coast to Big Sur, which is near me, where I am now in Santa Cruz. And while they were there, Jane got so committed that was when she started getting arrested every Friday. And the three of them were twice arrested together. And, Jane Fonda, at whatever age she is, she seems ageless in some way. But Rosanna, for one, was very inspired by that. And we just had a question from one of the viewers talking about activism in the FDR era, for example, how a lot of the New Deal in this questioner's analysis was passed because of the work of activists helped add urgency to it. So we talk a lot about activists of the cults, MAGA activists, but what about left-wing activists playing a constructive role? What is the role of activists on the left who support the goals of Biden-Harris, but maybe worry that they're not approaching those goals with enough urgency? I'd love to hear from each of you, starting with Mary.
Well, it is kind of interesting because a lot of progressive activists, young people, minorities will say that they pushed Biden over they brought him over the finish line, as it were, with Harris as the vice president. And you will see them pushing and you see people like Cori Bush, who was an activist in Missouri, in Congress, and others. And you did see them talk about racial equity. I think he was one of the first presidents to actually mouth that and have a platform about private prisons and helping Black businesses, and basically putting forth rescinding that 1776 commission and adding back racial justice and bias training in federal agencies. And while people will say that it's not far enough, you can see that he is the Biden-Harris administration. They're actually talking about some things when it comes to climate, when it comes to immigration. And I think the activism on the left did push that, as well as events. I mean, obviously, Black activists and allies have been talking quite a bit about police reform. And it really came to when there was actual video of the George Floyd killing, a lot of other people say, oh, okay, I get what you've been talking about. So I do think, yes, they'll have a voice, but with such a close Senate, closely divided Senate and House, we'll see what is going to happen. I do think that voting rights should probably be at the top of the list of things they're going to try to push, because we see that Republicans are trying to put in place a lot of restrictive voting laws and gerrymandering, which will hurt Democrats going forward. So yeah, they do have a part to play. And even though folks have tried to say that the excesses on January 6th are similar to the excesses in the social justice movement, I really don't think that is a fair comparison, since one group was trying to overthrow the government of the United States and the other one was just saying they want police to stop killing them, basically. And so I'm also kind of interested in seeing all the police unions and so forth that back Donald Trump. What is going to be the reaction? Because obviously a lot of the pro-Trump rioters on January 6th did not have, might say Blue Lives Matter, but they were, really beating up on a lot of law enforcement folks. So that'll be interesting to see as well.
I'm probably not the best person to talk about the left-leaning activists because of, it's not in that realm. But I do agree with Mary that if you're being killed and tortured by police officers, you have the right to peacefully protest that, like the people were doing in Lafayette Square. And I think that was a seminal moment for Donald Trump when he cleared that square with the military and he walked out there clumsily with that Bible. He was literally holding it like it was a soiled diaper. I think people will look back on June 1st of 2020 and say, okay, that was a seminal day. There was something really off about that situation. So I applaud people's rights to peacefully protest, and it's all there in our Constitution to do that. What I would like to see is Republican activism. And so the Lincoln Project, I guess, is no longer Republican. Steve Schmidt has told me that he's registered as a Democrat. Others inside the Lincoln Project have now registered as independents. I'm still a registered Republican. And what I would like to see is an insurgency inside the Republican Party of activism, but perhaps it's a different form of activism than what you'd be used to on the left or these lunatics on the right. And what that activism would be is to try to restate and rebuild that party. And maybe we can't return it to the party of Lincoln or not even the party of Reagan, but maybe we can rebuild and renew that party. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if we don't do that, that party's heading for the cliff. That's going to be an aging group of white people that buy catheters and MyPillows from Fox News commercial interruptions. And so we have to figure that out. And by the way, I would tell you, if our history is strong and we believe in social progress and racial justice, having two strong parties, one that's not off the cliff in a cult-like situation, but sort of a normal consensus building party, would probably be good for the country.
I want to just respond to that by saying I was just talking about this with someone else, and I'm very much a Democrat, clearly. But I, for one, want to see a viable Republican Party that isn't taken over by people who believe dangerous fantasies, because I think one lesson of the last 4 years is it can always get worse, can always get worse. And if the Republican Party does completely go over a cliff and explode, that's a lot of shrapnel flying all over the place. And I think it could be a very dangerous situation for the country.
Steve, it's the only reason why I stayed registered as a Republican. You know, that I have no home in that party, but maybe we can rebuild that party and open it up to a more colorful, more beautiful mosaic that looks a lot more like the American people. What's happening right now is what Van Jones called after the Obama administration ended and Trump's administration started. It's a weird white lash. And, you know, Jill Lepore, who wrote These Truths, who's a fellow alumnus of Tufts, if you really study her book, anytime that there's Black and brown progress in the society, it is met with aggressive white lash. Okay, and we got to stop it. Okay, and you know, whether the whites like it or not, the demography has changed in the society, and we have to figure out a way to embrace each other and get comfortable with each other's differences and go forward as one country. Instead of it being America first, it has to be first we are Americans. And so, you know, unfortunately for me, politics did find me. Mary's quote is very well said. I wasn't really looking for it. I thought it was a business opportunity, a networking opportunity for me, but I'm in it now. I'm almost like the Michael Corleone of the goddamn thing. I'm trying to get out of it. I keep getting brought back in.
Pulling you back in.
But I'm just going to let you know, if this son of a bitch runs again, I will be very prominent in that party, doing everything I can to stop him. Everything that I can.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Barack Obama, because covering that race, for some people, it was the American dream. For others, it was a nightmare. And I also actually, my specialty was covering right-wing organizations. And I went to the first National Tea Party convention in Opryland. And I covered Glenn Beck's rally on the Mall. For some reason, I would always go to these different ones. And the things you heard, the birtherism, the hate, you know, it was a real shock for some people's system when he became president. And there was that, as you called it, white lash. And, you know, I think the same thing when Biden and Harris were there and their families and Kamala Harris's family, that some people thought that was gorgeous. And for other people, that was something that was just, that's not their America. And as you said, if you look back when Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, he couldn't have without the votes of a lot of Republicans, like the Dirksons, because, you know, that was when there were a lot of Southern Dixiecrats, and that was the way the parties were. But then it quickly did reshuffle, and you saw the cynical moves, and that's where we are today. And it's going to take a lot, because as my son, the historian, reminds me, it's as Anthony said, with progress in the United States of America or any place, has always come pushback, has always come pushback. And as the Martin Luther King used to say, he just wanted America to live up to the words. We have beautiful words in all of our founding documents. Just do that, and we would be fine. But it's really hard. Maybe we do need that truth. I've been in South Africa, traveled a few times, and they had to have their Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so they would all at least be agreed on what the facts were, what the history of the country was. But we see here even battles over how to teach our history. It's not going to be easy.
Well, I'm expecting to keep my hair through the whole thing, though, Mary. I just want you to know that, okay? Because if I was going to lose my hair, it would have been in the last 4 years.
You've got great hair.
I'm just expecting to keep it, okay? And it's real.
Yeah.
I'm expecting to keep it, no matter what happens.
So working class, we're Catholic, Harvard. I didn't know we had so much in common, Anthony.
See that? And that's what people find out. They have more in common than they think once they meet each other.
I knew you two were going to get along. I was just sure. But I don't know if people can see this. This is the full list of contributors. And we do have 3 Pulitzer Prize winners in the book, including Cynthia Tucker. And the reason I mention her is her essay is called White Lash, Anthony. And Anthony and I will be, I can mention this, right, Bill? We'll be doing an event, Anthony, Cynthia, and I, with the Commonwealth Club in another week. So if any of you can't get enough of Anthony and me, we won't have Mary, but come back in a week and we'll continue the discussion. Thanks very much.
But if you want more of me, I do want you all to Apple, Spotify, Equal Time with Mary C. Curtis is my podcast. I have a column at CQ Roll Call. I write about the split between white and Black Catholics, actually, and many other issues like that. I do the intersection of politics, culture, and race. And you could look at maryccurtis.com because I'm all over the place.
One more Mary C. Curtis plug is here at the Wellstone Center in the Redwoods, where I'm co-director. We have a fellowship for African-American journalists wanting to work on a book proposal. It's called the Mary C. Curtis Fellowship. And actually the deadline is March 1st. So go to our website, wellstoneredwoods with an s.org, or just look for me on Twitter, Steve Kettmann, Kettmann, and just reach out that way. But we would love to hear from more African-American journalists looking to come. It doesn't cost you anything. You come and you can focus on a book proposal, and we'll try to help you craft it and polish it. So thank you.
Well, listen, thank you all three of you. I knew this was going to be a great event, but the 3 of you just blew me away with the topics you covered, your approach to them, and the camaraderie that sometimes unknown camaraderie that just sort of surfaced during the middle of the event. Thank you very much. Once again, here's the book. Now what? I still am astonished that Steve was able to put it together this quickly. The election seems to never end, so the relevance of this book will never end either. So I urge you all to get it, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you, Mary.
It's so nice meeting you, Anthony. Like I said, we have a lot in common. What can I say?